So for this live demo on exposure, I've got 3 items set up in front of the camera that represent different levels of exposure for different subjects. And as usual, I've got my camera tethered to my laptop here that is all set to remote control it, but once again just uses the same controls that you have in your standard SLR camera. All right, so as I look through this frame, I've got a middle gray subject, I've got a pure white subject over here on the left, and a very, very dark subject on the right there, perhaps pure black. As I move this cursor around the frame, I'm able to choose different metering sections within the frame itself. Now, many cameras have what's called a spot metering system, which allows you to limit the area of exposure from the entire frame that you're looking at to just a very small section. And in some situations, it's useful to use that. However, this demo is not just to talk about spot metering, but just to talk about metering in general. When you have an evaluative metering process, which most cameras do, they're taking into consideration the entire frame. And they might, for example, favor items that are located in the middle of the frame more than items located at the edges of the frame. And then they might take a look at different sections, divide it all up and chop it up in little bits, and then say, okay, well, these sections have priority over these sections. But however the metering system is set up and however you've chosen to customize your camera, there's always the possibility that in a certain situation, the camera is going to think differently than you are in terms of your subject. Maybe, for example, in this situation, we know that our subject is the black bear, okay? We know that it's very dark and it's going to have a different exposure setting than the other items, but the camera doesn't. The camera just says, well, I've got all these items in, and I'm going to compare and contrast all these different sections of the frame, and I'm just going to make a decision for exposure based upon everything. As a result, you might get something that looks like this, where the exposure on the black bear is quite dark, the exposure on the light chick is too light, but the exposure for the middle gray elephant is perfect. Now, if I take this rectangle over and I place it on top of the bear, you may notice that there's been a change already in the exposure rating. So now it's exposing more for the bear. And if I zoom in, you'll see this better. Let me just zoom in and refocus on the fur there. Okay. Let me just move over so I've got just nothing but the black fur. Okay, so there you can see on the black fur, all the fibers are present. All the detail and the texture is there in spite of how dark this surface is. It's exposing correctly now for the bear itself. But now if I zoom out, you'll notice that the white chick is completely whitewashed, completely gone. There's no detail there in the texture whatsoever. In fact, you really can't even see any difference between the exposure, the exposed area here and the background, the white background. The middle gray elephant is too light, but I can still see texture there. Okay, so the elephant is still within the realm of exposure here. But notice the black bear, all the detail is there. All the detail in the fur, the black bear looks correctly exposed. And this is something that we might expect if we're using a spot metering system and we focused that spot directly on the bear, took a meter reading off the bear, and then recomposed the photograph to take all 3 into account. So if the subject was the bear, maybe that's the way to go. Now, if we were to then put the attention back on the elephant, we're getting more of a middle-of-the-road exposure. We're getting something closer to what we'd have in an evaluative metering process where everything is probably compared and contrasted, and we come up with sort of an average. Well, middle gray is often where we like to be. It's often closest to the flesh tones of humans that we're trying to shoot. But not necessarily. It's often closest towards, to the overall exposure that's going to satisfy all the subjects. But again, many situations arise where we're going to have subjects that don't fill the frame, subjects that aren't readily apparent to the metering system that that's the correct exposure. So in this situation, I've got a little bit of detail lacking in both the bear and the chick, but the elephant is correctly exposed. Now let's go to the other extreme. Let's expose for the chick now. And notice how much darker it got already. Let's zoom in on that chick. And let's just refocus really quick. Okay, now that's the fur there. It's a little bit harder to pick up than it was the black bear. So let me just move over a little bit so you can see the rest of the chick. There we go. Now we can see it's in focus. You can see all the little fibers now are all present on that chick's fur. Everything is focused. But the exposure, of course, for the overall image is now so slanted towards the white areas that now we're getting differentiation between the chick's fur and the white background. But look how dark the elephant is, and the bear is so dark that it's basically silhouetted. It's so dark that you really can't even see what it is. So this just gives you some idea of what's going on with the light metering system inside your camera, whether you use spot metering or whether you use the full frame evaluative process, and then you zoom in with your zoom lens to restrict it to one particular part of the frame, or however you choose to meter your scene. Don't forget that you've always got the ability to use manual override. So if you are using an automatic exposure method of some sort, whether it's shutter priority, aperture priority, or full automatic, just realize that manual is always an option for you if you're not getting what you want from your metering system. But if there are ways in which you can get your metering system to more accurately evaluate what you think is the subject, then you might be off to much better results much faster.